ITV News. Mr. President, you yourself acknowledge the controversial timing of your comments on the EU referendum and the spirited debate that we're having here. And I think you're right. In the weeks before your arrival here, Leave campaigners have said that you're acting hypocritically. America would not accept the loss of sovereignty that we have to accept as part of the EU. America would not accept the levels of immigration from Mexico that we have to accept from the EU. And therefore, in various degrees of politeness, they have said to you that you should really keep your views to yourself. With that in mind, Mr. President, do you still think it was the right decision to intervene in this debate? And can I ask you this, crucially, what happens if the UK does decide in June to leave the European Union?
Well, first of all, let me repeat. This is a decision for the people of the United Kingdom to make. I'm not coming here to fix any votes. I'm not casting a vote myself. I'm offering my opinion. And in democracies, everybody should want more information, not less. And you shouldn't be afraid to hear an argument being made. That's not a threat. That should enhance the debate, particularly because my understanding is that some of the folks on the other side have been ascribing to the United States certain actions we'll take if the UK does leave the EU. So they say, for example, that, well, we'll just cut our own trade deals with the United States. So they're voicing an opinion about what the United States is going to do. I figured you might want to hear from the President of the United States what I think the United States is going to do. And on that matter, for example, I think it's fair to say that maybe some point down the line there might be a UK-US trade agreement, but it's not going to happen anytime soon because our focus is in negotiating with a big bloc, the European Union, to get a trade agreement done. And UK is going to be in the back of the queue, not because we don't have a special relationship, but because given the heavy lift on any trade agreement, us having access to a big market with a lot of countries rather than trying to do piecemeal trade agreements is hugely inefficient. Now, to the subject at hand, obviously the United States is in a different hemisphere, different circumstances, has different sets of relationships with its neighbors than the UK does. But I can tell you this, if right now I've got access to a massive market where I sell 44% of my exports, and now I'm thinking about leaving the organization that gives me access to that market and that is responsible for millions of jobs in my country and responsible for an enormous amount of commerce and upon which a lot of businesses depend, that's not something I'd probably do. And what I'm trying to describe is a broader principle, which is in our own ways. I mean, we don't have a common market in the Americas, but in all sorts of ways, the United States constrains itself in order to bind everyone under a common set of norms and rules that makes everybody more prosperous. That's what we built after World War II. The United States and the UK designed a set of institutions, whether it was the United Nations or the Bretton Woods structure, IMF, World Bank, NATO, across the board. Now that, to some degree, constrained our freedom to operate. It meant that occasionally we had to deal with some bureaucracy. It meant that on occasion we have to persuade other countries, and we don't get 100% of what we want in each case, but we knew that by doing so, everybody was going to be better off, partly because the norms and rules that were put in place were reflective of what we believe. If there were more free markets around the world and an orderly financial system, we knew we could operate in that environment. If we had collective defense treaties through NATO, we understood that we could formalize an architecture that would deter aggression rather than us having piecemeal to put together alliances to defeat aggression after it already started. And that principle is what's at stake here. And the last point I'll make on this, until I get the next question, I suspect, is that, as David said, this magnifies the power of the UK. It doesn't diminish it. On just about every issue, what happens in Europe is going to have an impact here. And what happens in Europe is going to have an impact in the United States. We just discussed, for example, the refugee and the migration crisis. And I've told my team, which is sitting right here, so they'll vouch for me, that we consider it a major national security issue that you have uncontrolled migration into Europe. Not because these folks are coming to the United States, but because if it destabilizes Europe, our largest trading bloc, trading partner, that's going to be bad for our economy. If you start seeing divisions in Europe, that weakens NATO. That'll have an impact on our collective security. Now, if in fact I want somebody who's smart and common sense and tough and is thinking as I do in the conversations about how migration is going to be handled, somebody who also has a sense of compassion and recognizes that immigration can enhance, when done properly, the assets of a country and not just diminish them, well, I want David Cameron in the conversation. Just as I want him in the conversation when we're having discussions about information sharing and counterterrorism activity. Precisely because I have a confidence in the UK, and I know that if we're not working effectively with Paris or Brussels, then those attacks are going to migrate to the United States and to London. I want one of my strongest partners in that conversation. So it enhances the special relationship. It doesn't diminish it.
Let me just make, Chris, one point in response to that. I mean, this is our choice, nobody else's, the sovereign choice of the British people. But as we make that choice, it surely makes sense to listen to what our friends think, to listen to their opinion, to listen to their views, and that's what Barack's been talking about today. But it's also worth remembering, as we make this choice, it's a British choice about the British membership of the European Union. We're not being asked to make a choice about whether we support the German style of membership or the Italian style of membership. Britain has a special status in the European Union. We're in the single market, we're not part of the single currency. We're able to travel and live and work in other European countries, but we've maintained our borders because we're not in the Schengen no-border zone. And on this vital issue of trade, where Barack has made such a clear statement, we should remember why we are currently negotiating this biggest trade deal in the whole world and in the whole world's history between the European Union and the United States. It's because Britain played an absolutely leading part in pushing for those talks to get going. Indeed, we announced them at the G8 in Northern Ireland when Britain was in the chair of that organization. We set the agenda for what could be an absolutely game-changing trade deal for jobs, for investment, because we were part of this organization. So I just want to add those important points. I think we have a US question now.
Justin Singh.
Thanks, Mr. President. Following on that, do you think that between Brexit and the migration issue, European unity is at a crisis point? What do you hope leaders gathering in Germany can concretely do about it? And do you expect those nations to militarily support, including the possibility of ground troops, the new government